Welcome, dear listener. As you prepare to drift into a peaceful sleep, find a comfortable spot, close your eyes, and take a slow, deep breath. Let the weight of the day melt away as we journey into a world of mystery and enchantment. Let the magic of this tale take you to places unknown, where every twist and turn brings you closer to the heart of the mystery. The wind stirs, the night deepens, and Elara's adventure awaits. Relax, let your thoughts drift, and allow the world of the ancient woods to envelop you as we embark on a journey together, one step at a time, into the unknown. Beneath the shadow of the ancient wood, where the trees loomed like silent sentinels, a village slept, its narrow streets darkened by tales of old. Elara had heard them all, whispered by flickering firelight on nights when the wind howled through the rooftops. The villagers spoke of a witch who lived deep within the forest, her presence more a rumor than a truth, yet one no one dared to challenge. The witch's domain was a place Elara had been warned against her entire life. Like the villagers before her, bound by the invisible chains of fear. But fear was a luxury she could not afford. The village had grown too small, its edges fraying beneath the weight of her unspoken desires. Every morning felt the same, the sun rising and betting on a life that seemed far too ordinary. And so, one night, with the moon veiled behind a shroud of mist, Elara stepped quietly from her home and made her way toward the forest, toward the stories that called to her like distant, forgotten dreams. The air grew colder the further she ventured into the woods, the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves filling her senses. Branches, like skeletal hands, reached for her, scratching against her skin as if warning her to turn back. But Elara pressed on, her heart racing with both fear and anticipation. She followed no path, for none existed, trusting only the pull that seemed to lead her deeper into the heart of the forest. After what felt like hours, the woods gave way to a small clearing bathed in eerie twilight. In the center stood a dilapidated cabin, its roof sagging under the weight of time. The walls were covered in vines that twisted and knotted like snakes, and at the entrance, a door hung slightly ajar as if awaiting her arrival. Elara hesitated at the threshold, the stories of the witch clawing at her mind. Yet something far stronger than fear urged her forward. With a deep breath, she pushed open the door and stepped inside. The air inside the cabin was thick with the scent of herbs and smoke, the dim light from a single lantern casting flickering shadows on the walls. And there, seated at a crooked table, was the witch. She was not what Elara had imagined. The witch's eyes, dark as the deepest night, shimmered beneath a veil of raven feathers. Her hands, twisted and gnarled with age, were surprisingly delicate as they moved over a bundle of what appeared to be feathers. A cloak, dark as midnight. "I knew you would come," The witch's voice was a rasp, barely more than a whisper, yet it filled the room. They always come when they are ready. Elara said nothing, unsure of what to ask, or if she even dared to ask. Her gaze fell to the cloak, the feathers shimmering faintly in the lantern's glow. There was something alive about it, something more than mere fabric. It hummed, almost imperceptibly, as if it carried the whisper of distant winds. The witch stood slowly, her eyes never leaving Elara's. "This is what you seek," she said, her voice laced with knowing. "A gift for those who long to leave, but do not understand the cost of their desire." Elara's heart pounded in her chest. She wanted to speak, to protest, to ask 100 questions. But before she could, the witch placed the cloak gently over her shoulders. The weight of it was nothing, yet Elara felt its power immediately, as though her feet no longer touched the ground. "Fly," the witch whispered, her breath cold against Elara's skin. "Fly far, to the lands no one remembers. But know this, child. What you seek is not what you will find. And once you begin, there is no turning back." Elara's breath caught in her throat as the cloak tightened around her, the feathers rustling like the wings of a great bird. The walls of the cabin faded, replaced by the vast open sky, and she was no longer standing. She was soaring. The village, the forest, the world she had known fell away beneath her, and all that remained was the endless expanse of possibility. And so, her journey began. The sky beckoned, the wind whispered, and Elara flew into the unknown. The world below had become a distant dream. Village, forest, all of it lost in the shifting clouds that now surrounded her. Elara floated, suspended in the vastness of the sky, her arms outstretched as if she had been born to fly. The cloak of feathers clung to her, each raven black plume fluttering as though alive, guiding her every movement. She felt weightless, as though the earth's pull no longer applied, and with it came a strange sense of both freedom and unease. The sky was not as empty as it seemed. Whispers threaded through the wind, low murmurs that rose and fell like forgotten secrets. Elara strained to hear them, but the voices remained just beyond understanding, flickering like faint shadows on the edge of her mind. "Fly far, to the lands no one remembers." The witch's words echoed in her thoughts, and as they did, the cloak tugged gently at her, urging her to move. It wanted her to go, but to where, she did not know. She closed her eyes, surrendering to the pull of the cloak, and with that simple act, the wind around her began to shift. The air grew colder, thinner, as if she were leaving behind the familiar world and entering somewhere else entirely. She opened her eyes to find herself flying over a vast ocean, its waters dark as night, undisturbed by the moonlight that barely touched its surface. Below, the waves seemed to ripple with strange shapes, figures that moved just beneath the water. though she could not tell if they were real or illusions cast by the cloak's magic. Ahead, rising from the ocean's depths, she saw it. An island, cloaked in mist, its jagged cliffs illuminated faintly by the pale glow of the moon. The sight sent a shiver down her spine. This place, though unknown, felt ancient, as if it had been forgotten by time itself. The cloak pulled harder now, and Elara had no choice but to follow. She descended slowly, her feet touching the damp, rocky shore of the island. The air was heavy with the scent of salt and decay, and the mist clung to her skin like a living thing, wrapping itself around her ankles as though it, too, sought to keep her there. There were no signs of life, no trees, no birds, only the endless sound of the ocean crashing against the rocks. Yet something about this island was alive, though not in any way she had ever known. The ground beneath her feet seemed to pulse faintly, as if the earth itself had a heartbeat. Elara wrapped the cloak tighter around herself and began to walk. The mist swirled around her, thickening with every step until she could see nothing but the faint outline of a towering structure in the distance. As she drew closer, she realized it was a temple. Ancient, crumbling, half buried in the earth. The stone walls were covered in strange carvings, symbols she could not read but somehow recognized in the depths of her mind, as though they had been part of her dreams long before she had ever set foot on this island. She reached out, her fingers brushing the cold stone. The symbols glowed faintly at her touch, and a low hum vibrated through the air, the same sound that had echoed in the wind when she had first donned the cloak. It was as though the island itself was calling to her, but for what purpose she could not yet understand. Before her, at the base of the temple, was a door, massive and ancient, its surface etched with more of the strange symbols. It stood slightly ajar, a thin sliver of darkness beckoning her forward. Elara hesitated. Every instinct screamed at her to turn back, to return to the safety of the sky, to leave this place behind. But the cloak hummed again, its feathers rustling as if urging her forward. The whispers on the wind grew louder, though she still could not understand their words. Steeling herself, she pushed the door open and stepped inside. The darkness swallowed her whole. Inside the temple, the air was thick, heavy with the weight of centuries. The walls seemed to close in on her, the narrow hallway winding deeper and deeper into the earth. The only sound was her own breathing, echoing back at her from the stone walls. But there, at the end of the corridor, something glittered faintly. A soft, ethereal glow that pulsed like a heartbeat. Elara moved toward it, her steps slow and cautious. As she drew closer, she saw what it was. A single feather, carved into the stone floor, its surface glowing with a pale, eerie light. The sight of it sent a shiver down her spine. She knelt beside it, tracing the lines of the feather with her fingertips. And as she did, the cloak tightened around her. the feathers rustling like a warning. This was no ordinary treasure. Something far darker awaited her in the shadows beyond. And so, her journey deepened, the whispers growing louder, the island holding its breath for what was to come. The feathers' glow flickered as if alive, casting strange, wavering shadows on the stone walls of the narrow temple corridor. Elara's fingers lingered on its surface, the cool stone beneath her touch humming faintly, as though it carried the weight of forgotten voices. Her pulse quickened. There was something here, something waiting beneath the island's silence. But as the cloak whispered against her skin, she couldn't tell if it was urging her forward or warning her to turn back. The air grew colder the further she ventured into the temple, the walls damp with time and neglect. She moved carefully, her footsteps echoing unnaturally loud in the stillness. The island had seemed abandoned when she arrived, but now, deep within its belly, Elara could feel the presence of something that watched. Something ancient, buried beneath centuries of shadow. The cloak wrapped itself tighter around her, the feathers brushing her neck like a caress, urging her deeper still. The temple's inner chamber revealed itself in the dim light, vast and cavernous. Stone pillars rose from the ground, disappearing into the high unseen ceiling, and the walls were covered in more of the strange symbols, the carvings almost too worn to be decipherable. In the center of the chamber stood a pedestal, ancient and cracked, as though the weight of ages had tried to crush it into the earth. Upon the pedestal rested a single object, a feather, not unlike the one carved into the floor behind her. But this one was real, long dark and shimmering with the same eerie glow. It seemed to pulse with life, the light it cast dancing in unnatural patterns across the walls. Elara approached cautiously, her heart pounding in her chest, the weight of the cloak growing heavier with each step. The feather, this strange, glowing relic, was calling to her. She could feel it deep within her bones, a pull that both terrified and thrilled her. The whispers on the wind had fallen silent now, the air thick with a tension that pressed down on her like an unseen hand. She reached out, her fingers trembling as they hovered over the feather. The moment her skin made contact, a sudden jolt of energy surged through her, like lightning striking from the sky. The chamber trembled, the stone beneath her feet cracking, as if the earth itself was waking from a deep sleep. The air hummed, with the low, vibrating sound rising in intensity, filling the space with a strange, melodic hum. Elara stumbled backward, her heart racing as the chamber's light shifted. The walls, once worn and weathered, now gleamed with life, the symbols glowing brighter with each passing second. The ground beneath her feet rippled, the cracks in the stone spreading, and from within those cracks, shadows began to pour. Dark, inky tendrils that twisted and writhed like smoke brought to life. Something was stirring. The pedestal, now shaking, began to sink into the ground, the feather atop it dissolving into the air, scattering into 1,000 tiny specks of light. The cloak tightened around Elara's shoulders, its feathers rustling violently, almost as if it was struggling against an invisible force. She took a step back, her breath catching in her throat as the shadows converged, swirling together at the center of the chamber, taking form. A figure emerged, tall and cloaked in darkness, its shape barely human. The face, if it could be called a face, was obscured by a deep hood, and where eyes should have been, there were only hollow voids that stared unblinkingly at Elara. The air around the figure crackled with energy, and a voice, low and ancient, filled the chamber. "You seek the treasure," it whispered, the sound reverberating in Elara's bones. "But the island keeps what is lost for a reason." Elara's heart pounded as the figure stepped forward, its movements slow, deliberate. The cloak trembled against her back, as if it too sensed the danger. She wanted to speak, to demand answers, but her voice caught in her throat, fear coiling tightly around her. The figure tilted its head, the empty voids where its eyes should have been seeming to pierce through her. "The cloak will lead you," it said, its voice like a gust of wind through the trees. "But know this, not all that is sought should be found." Before Elara could respond, the figure dissolved into the air, leaving only the echo of its words behind. The chamber fell silent once more, the shadows retreating into the cracks of the earth, the glow of the symbols fading into nothingness. Elara stood alone in the dark, her heart still racing. The island had given her a warning, though its meaning remained unclear. The treasure, whatever it was not what it seemed. But the cloak still hummed against her skin, urging her to continue. And so, with the weight of the island's mysteries pressing down on her, Elara turned and made her way back toward the temple's entrance. The sky beyond the island beckoned, and though she did not know where the cloak would take her next, she knew her journey was far from over. The whispers of the wind had returned, and they were growing louder. The wind carried secrets. As Elara emerged from the ancient temple, the sky above had shifted. The once clear night now heavy with rolling clouds, dark and swollen with an impending storm. The wind, which had once been her guide, now seemed restless, tugging at her cloak in sharp, erratic bursts. Yet beneath the wild gusts, the whispers continued, faint but insistent, weaving through the air like threads of an untold story. She stood at the island's edge, gazing out at the endless expanse of sea. The cloak's magic still clung to her, its dark feathers shimmering with an almost unnatural sheen. But something had changed. The island's warning echoed in her mind, that strange figure's voice lingering like a shadow. Not all that is sought should be found, But Elara could not turn back. The cloak would not let her. With a deep breath, she spread her arms wide, feeling the familiar surge of power lift her from the ground. The wind caught her like an old friend, though its touch was rougher now, as if testing her resolve. The island below disappeared into the mist, swallowed by the clouds as Elara soared higher, the weight of its mysteries trailing behind her like a distant memory. She flew for what felt like hours, the wind's whispers growing louder, more coherent. It was not merely sound, it was language, ancient and forgotten, spoken by voices that belonged to neither man nor beast. She strained to understand, but the meaning danced just out of reach, the words slipping through her mind like water through cupped hands. Far below, the sea roared, its surface churning violently as the storm gathered strength. The sky had darkened to an inky black, and jagged forks of lightning split the horizon, illuminating the clouds in eerie fleeting bursts. Yet the cloak seemed to guide her toward something just beyond the storm's edge, something hidden within the chaos of the elements. The wind's whispers grew urgent now, their tone shifting from the soft hum of mystery to a harsh, frantic chant. Elara's pulse quickened as the wind began to pull her in directions she did not choose, tugging her toward a thick wall of storm clouds that loomed ahead like a barrier between worlds. The air was thick with tension, and she could feel the storm's power building, crackling in the air around her. A voice, clearer than before, rose from the wind, cutting through the cacophony. It was a voice she had never heard, yet one that seemed to speak directly to her soul. The storm is your test, child of the feathers. Only through it shall you find what you seek. Elara hesitated, her heart pounding. The storm was no ordinary squall. It was alive with energy, a swirling mass of fury and chaos. And within it, she could feel something, watching. Yet the cloak urged her forward, the feathers vibrating with an undeniable force. She took a deep breath and without another thought, dove into the heart of the storm. The world exploded around her. Wind screamed in her ears, whipping her hair into wild tangles and pulling at the cloak with a ferocity she had never felt. Lightning cracked across the sky, illuminating the swirling vortex of clouds that surrounded her. The air was thick with rain and thunder, the very sky seeming to shake as she fought to stay aloft. But the cloak held her, its magic anchoring her as she navigated the storm's wrath. The whispers of the wind had become a chorus now, a symphony of voices that rose and fell with the storm's pulse. They no longer spoke in riddles. There was a direction, a purpose behind the chaos, guiding her deeper into the storm's eye. Ahead, a break in the clouds appeared, small at first, but growing wider as she flew towards it. Beyond the storm's fury, a vast expanse of sky opened up, calm and eerily still. Elara burst through the wall of clouds, gasping for breath as the wind finally released its grip on her. And there, hovering in the center of the calm, was an island, one she had never seen before, hidden from the world by the storm's eternal guard. It was small, its shores glowing faintly with an otherworldly light, and at its center stood a massive tree, its branches twisted and gnarled, yet pulsing with life. The whispers faded as she descended, the cloak carrying her gently to the island's surface. The air here was different, still, silent, as though the island existed outside of time itself. The ground beneath her feet was soft, the earth warm and pulsing like a heartbeat. Elara approached the tree, her breath catching in her throat. Beneath its twisted roots lay something buried, something that shimmered with a faint golden glow. The cloak rustled against her skin. A single word whispered into her ear. Dig. Her hands trembled as she knelt before the roots, her fingers sinking into the soft earth. She began to dig, the soil parting easily beneath her touch, as if it had been waiting for this moment. And then, as her hands scraped the surface of something hard and smooth, the whispers of the wind fell silent. Elara brushed the dirt away to reveal a small, intricately carved box, its surface glowing faintly, with the same eerie light that pulsed through the island. Her heart raced, the weight of the treasure's presence heavy in the stillness. But as her fingers closed around the box, she felt it, something shifting in the air, a presence watching her from the shadows of the storm. The box felt heavy in Elara's hands, not because of its weight, but because of the power that pulsed within it, alive, waiting. As she rose from the earth beneath the great tree, the air around her seemed to still further, the island's strange glowing light dimming as though it held its breath. The whispers of the wind, once constant companions, had gone silent, leaving only the steady beat of her own heart echoing in the vast, unearthly silence. Elara's fingers traced the intricate carvings on the box's surface. Ancient symbols, ones she had seen before, but still could not decipher, seemed to shift under her touch. She felt the pull of the box, urging her to open it, to release whatever secrets it held. But something within her hesitated, a lingering sense of warning, of danger. With a deep breath, she tucked the box into her cloak and rose to her feet. The treasure was not yet revealed, and something told her that this journey was far from over. The wind, as if sensing her resolve, returned in a soft gust, swirling around her in a gentle embrace. But the whispers had changed. They were no longer the cryptic murmurs she had once followed. Now they carried urgency, a hurried pace that seemed to beckon her forward. The forest awaits. The words seemed to dance on the breeze, though no voice spoke them aloud. Elara stepped toward the edge of the island, the storm clouds parting before her as if by command. The cloak, lighter now, spread its feathers wide, lifting her into the sky with ease. The storm that had once roared with fury was now nothing more than a distant rumble as she flew toward the horizon. The wind guided her south, over seas and mountains, until at last she saw it, the forest. It stretched endlessly beneath her, a sprawling mass of dark green, alive with the magic of ancient times. The trees were tall, their trunks thick with moss and age, their branches intertwined to form a canopy that blocked out the sun. A sense of mystery hung over the forest, a feeling that this place was not meant for the living. As Elara descended into the canopy, the air grew thick, almost tangible, as if the forest itself was alive and watching. Shadows flickered at the edges of her vision, but whenever she turned her head, they vanished, slipping back into the undergrowth like phantoms. The whispers, so urgent before, had softened once more, blending with the rustling of the leaves, the soft murmur of the wind weaving through the trees. This was no ordinary forest. It felt as though it was waiting for something, waiting for her. The path before her was narrow, barely visible through the thick underbrush, but the cloak guided her steps. Its feathers rustled softly, responding to the magic in the air, almost as though it was familiar with this place. Elara followed the path deeper into the forest, the air growing cooler with each step. The trees seemed to lean closer, their branches curling inward, blocking out what little light remained. The further she walked, the more the forest seemed to come alive. The shadows at the edge of her vision grew bolder, moving with purpose, as though they were more than mere tricks of the light. At times, she thought she heard faint laughter, a soft, melodic sound that sent a chill through her bones. It was not a sound of joy, but one of mischief, as if the forest itself were playing a game she did not yet understand. Suddenly, the path opened into a small clearing. At the center stood a stone altar, overgrown with vines and moss. The air here was different, thicker, heavier, with magic that seemed to seep from the very ground. Elara hesitated at the edge of the clearing, her heart pounding. Something was watching her. She could feel its gaze, though she saw nothing. The whispers grew louder, though they did not come from the wind this time. They came from the ground, the trees, the very air. Place the box. Elara approached the altar cautiously, the cloak tightening around her as if sensing the danger. The vines that covered the stones seemed to pulse with life, their tendrils curling toward her as she drew nearer. She removed the box from her cloak, its carvings glowing faintly in the dim light of the forest. As she set the box on the altar, the ground trembled beneath her feet, and the vines recoiled as though they had been burned. The forest stirred, the trees swaying despite the still air, and from the shadows, a figure emerged. It was not human, though it wore the shape of one. Its eyes gleamed with an otherworldly light, and its skin was the color of the deepest forest shadows. You seek what you do not understand, the figure said, its voice echoing with the sound of leaves rustling in the wind. The forest has no love for those who come searching for treasures that belong to the earth. Yet you are bound to the cloak, and the cloak to the wind. Tell me, wanderer, what price will you pay to finish your journey? Elara's heart pounded in her chest, the weight of the figure's gaze pressing down on her. The whispers, once soft and guiding, had fallen silent, leaving her alone in the heart of the enchanted forest. She knew the journey had only just begun, but the price of the treasure was becoming clearer with every step. The forest faded behind her, swallowed by the mist of memory and shadows. But the encounter with the figure lingered in Elara's thoughts, like a dark thread pulling her deeper into the unknown. The cloak of feathers, now familiar yet still strange, had once again lifted her into the sky, carrying her far beyond the reach of the trees. The figure's question echoed in her mind. What price will you pay to finish your journey? The answer, though unspoken, hung heavy in the air as she soared higher. The earth below shrinking into a distant, forgotten thing. The cloak's magic felt more potent now, its power coursing through her veins, guiding her like an invisible hand through the clouds. But with that power came a sense of unease, a growing awareness that the cloak was not simply a tool. It had its own will, its own desires. The wind had changed once more. It no longer whispered softly in her ear, nor did it carry the frantic urgency that had driven her through the storm. Now it was calm, measured, as though it waited for something to unfold. Elara ascended further, the sky around her deepening into a vast canvas of blue and gold, streaked with the light of a setting sun. The air grew thinner, crisper, and as she broke through the last layer of clouds, she saw them. Shapes moving through the air, graceful and silent, like birds but larger, more deliberate. The guardians of the sky. They circled above her, their forms barely visible against the fading light. At first, they seemed like creatures made of wind and cloud, their bodies shimmering with a faint, ethereal glow. But as they drew closer, Elara saw that they were not of this world. Their wings were vast, stretching across the sky like sails, each feather tipped with silver light. Their faces, though humanoid, were obscured by masks of bone and glass, eyes gleaming with ancient knowledge. The guardians didn't speak, but their presence filled the air with a heavy, unspoken language. The wind, as if acknowledging their authority, stilled around them, leaving only the soft rustle of feathers as they descended. Elara hovered in the air, the cloak holding her steady as she faced them, unsure of what would come next. One of the guardians, larger than the rest, approached her. Its wings unfurled slowly, casting a shadow across the sky. And when it spoke, its voice was like the echo of a distant storm, rumbling with a power that felt both ancient and eternal. You are not the first to wear the cloak of feathers, the guardian said, its voice carrying the weight of centuries. Many have come before you, seeking what lies beyond the sky, beyond the earth. Few have returned. Elara's heart beat loudly in her chest, but she met the guardian's gaze, the silver light of its eyes piercing through her. I seek the treasure, she said, her voice steady despite the uncertainty swirling within her. The treasure that the cloak leads me to. The guardian tilted its head, considering her words. The treasure is not what you believe it to be, it said softly, the storm in its voice quieting. What you seek is bound to the wind, to the sky, and to the earth. But with such a gift comes great cost. Elara swallowed, the weight of the guardian's words sinking in. What is the cost? The guardian spread its wings wide, the silver tips glowing brighter in the fading light. To claim the treasure, you must prove your worth. You must face the test of the sky, and in doing so you will reveal your true self. Only then will the treasure reveal its true form. Elara felt the cloak tighten around her, the feathers brushing against her skin like a warning. The test of the sky, the thought alone, sent a thrill of fear through her. But there was no turning back now. The journey had already begun, and the cloak would not let her stop until it was finished. What is the test? She asked, her voice barely more than a whisper. The guardian's wing shimmered as it rose higher into the sky, the other guardians following in its wake. The sky will test your heart, your resolve, and your truth. It will show you the cost of the treasure, and you will choose whether to pay it. Without another word, the guardians ascended into the clouds, their forms dissolving into the wind like mist. The sky darkened, the sun dipping below the horizon, leaving Elara alone beneath the vast expanse of stars. The wind had returned, colder now, sharper, carrying with it the weight of the test to come. Elara took a deep breath, the air filling her lungs with a strange electric energy. She could feel the sky watching her, waiting for her to make the first move. The cloak hummed softly, its feathers rippling with anticipation. And then, with a surge of power, the test began. The wind roared around her, pulling her in all directions, testing her balance, her strength. The sky itself seemed to shift, bending and warping as though reality had become fluid. And in the chaos, she saw it, the truth of the treasure she sought. Visions flashed before her eyes, of the earth below, of the storm she had crossed, of the forest's shadows and the box she had uncovered. The treasure was not an object, but a choice, a destiny intertwined with the very essence of the wind. Elara closed her eyes, letting the wind take her, trusting the cloak to carry her through the storm of her own making. The sky had become a living thing. It writhed and twisted around Elara, pulling her into the heart of its fury. Wind screamed in her ears, drowning out every other sound. Yet within the storm's chaos, there was a pulse, a deep, rhythmic beat that resonated with her very soul. The cloak held fast, its feathers whispering against her skin, guiding her through the turmoil, though Elara could no longer tell if it was friend or master. The storm was no longer simply a force of nature. It was alive, conscious, aware of her presence. The sky churned above her, clouds swirling into unnatural shapes, faces appearing for brief moments before dissolving into the wind. Thunder cracked and the air trembled with each roar, but beneath it all was the low, insistent hum of something ancient and hidden, something the storm guarded fiercely. The sky will test your heart, your resolve, and your truth. The guardian's words echoed in her mind, but their meaning remained elusive. Elara fought to stay aloft as the winds tugged at her cloak, trying to tear her from the sky. The cloak tightened around her, as if warning her to hold on, but it offered no more answers than the storm itself. Her heart raced with both fear and determination. She had come too far to turn back now. Then, through the whirlwind of clouds and chaos, she saw it. The eye of the storm, a calm, swirling void that beckoned her like a secret waiting to be unveiled. The pull was irresistible, and before she could second-guess herself, the cloak responded, carrying her toward the center. As Elara descended into the eye, the wind stilled and the noise of the storm faded to a distant murmur. Silence enveloped her. The sky was clear here, the clouds circling far above like silent sentinels, and in the heart of the calm stood a structure, an ancient, towering spire made of stone and glass, rising from the sea below, like a monument to some forgotten era. The spire shimmered with a strange light, as if the storm itself had forged it from the elements. Its surface was etched with symbols Elara had seen before, carved into the stone of the island's temple and woven into the fabric of the cloak. The wind, once an unpredictable force, now seemed to guide her gently toward the base of the spire, where a narrow stairway spiraled upward, vanishing into the sky. Elara's feet touched the stone steps, the ground solid beneath her for the first time since she had left the enchanted forest. The cloak rested lightly on her shoulders, no longer tugging her forward, as if waiting for her to take the next step of her own free will. She began to climb. The air was heavy with anticipation, each step carrying her higher, closer to whatever truth the storm concealed. The spire's walls whispered as she ascended, the ancient symbols glowing faintly under her touch. She could not understand their meaning, but they seemed to pulse with life, as though they too were watching her. At last, she reached the summit. The platform at the top of the spire was small, barely large enough to stand on, but from here, the view was limitless. The storm raged around her in all directions, But the eye remained perfectly calm, a serene oasis in the midst of chaos. The sea below shimmered in the fading light, and the sky stretched out infinitely, untouched by time or distance. In the center of the platform stood a pedestal carved from the same stone as the spire, and upon it lay the treasure, a golden feather, delicate and luminous, glowing with an inner light. It pulsed faintly, as if it held the very essence of the storm itself, the heart of the sky made tangible. Elara's breath caught in her throat. This was it, the treasure she had been seeking, the culmination of her journey. The feather seemed to call to her, its light casting long shadows on the stone as she approached. She reached out, her fingers trembling, drawn to the treasure like a moth to flame. But as her hand hovered over the feather, the storm's calm began to shift. The wind stirred, just a whisper at first, then a low, steady howl. The sky darkened, the clouds closing in, and the pedestal trembled beneath her feet. The storm, which had once seemed so distant, was now pressing in from all sides, as if it had been waiting for this moment. Elara hesitated, her heart pounding. The guardian's words returned to her once more. The sky will show you the cost of the treasure, and you will choose whether to pay it. The feather glowed brighter, its light flickering with urgency. The storm, alive and watching, swirled closer, a looming presence that demanded her answer. She could feel it now, the weight of the choice before her. To take the feather meant to claim the power of the storm, the power of the sky itself. But what was the price? What would the storm demand in return? Her hand wavered, suspended above the golden feather. The wind howled louder, the storm closing in, and in that moment, Elara knew that the answer was hers alone to give. Would she take the treasure and become bound to the sky? Or would she leave it behind, returning to the earth with the wisdom she had gained? The storm held its breath, waiting. The golden feather shimmered before her, glowing like the heart of the sun trapped within its delicate structure. Elara stood frozen, the weight of the storm bearing down on her, the winds now whispering in urgent, indecipherable voices. The feather was more than a treasure. It was a choice. She could feel it, deep within her bones, a pull stronger than gravity itself. To touch it, to claim it, was to bind herself to the sky forever. The cloak of feathers on her shoulders fluttered softly, responding to the currents swirling around her. It had guided her this far, but now it waited, silent and still, as though it, too, was uncertain of what was to come. Elara's breath came in shallow gasps, her fingers hovering just inches above the golden feather. The closer she came, the more alive the feather seemed, its light pulsing in rhythm with the storm that raged just beyond the calm eye. The winds whipped around the spire, and though the platform remained steady beneath her feet, she felt the storm watching her, judging her. What is the price of flight? The question gnawed at her, though no one had spoken it aloud. The answer hung heavy in the air, veiled in the storm's fury. It was not freedom that the feather promised, but something else, something deeper, more dangerous. The power to soar through the skies, to master the wind, came with a cost. But what would that cost be? Her thoughts flashed back to the island, to the strange figure in the forest, and the warning that echoed through her mind. You seek what you do not understand. The storm, the cloak, the treasure. They were all bound together, part of a greater truth that eluded her still. The guardians had said the sky would test her heart, her resolve, and now she felt the final test pressing down on her, like the weight of the storm clouds above. With a sudden surge of resolve, Elara reached out and grasped the feather. The world around her erupted into chaos. The storm, which had held its breath for so long, exploded into a violent tempest, winds howling like furious beasts. The platform trembled beneath her feet, the stone cracking and splintering as lightning split the sky in jagged streaks of blinding light. The feather in her hand pulsed wildly, its glow searing against her skin, and for a moment, Elara felt as though the sky itself had been torn open. The cloak wrapped tightly around her, its feathers vibrating with an intensity she had never felt before. The wind roared, no longer gentle or guiding, but a force that sought to tear her apart. The storm was not testing her now. It was consuming her. Elara's vision blurred, the world around her a whirlwind of light and sound, and yet, in the midst of the chaos, she felt something stir deep within her. A voice, soft and steady, rising above the storm's fury. Do you understand now? She did. The truth hit her with the force of a gale, and in that moment she saw the treasure for what it truly was. The feather was not a gift of eternal flight, but a bond, a pact with the storm, with the very essence of the sky. To hold it was to surrender herself to the winds, to become a part of the storm's eternal cycle, caught between earth and sky, never truly belonging to either. The power she had sought was not freedom. It was a cage made of air and light, a prison hidden within the promise of flight. The cloak had always known, and now so did she. The storm pressed in on her, demanding her choice. The feather burned in her hand, pulsing with the sky's power. But Elara's heart had already made its decision. She closed her eyes, feeling the weight of the truth settle over her like a final breath. With a deliberate, calm motion, she opened her hand and released the feather. The moment it left her grasp, the storm recoiled. The winds howled one last time, a cry of rage and sorrow, and then they fell silent. The platform beneath her steadied, the cracks in the stone knitting themselves together as if nothing had ever happened. The golden feather, no longer glowing, drifted slowly into the air, carried away by the breeze, disappearing into the clouds. The sky returned to its quiet, infinite expanse, the storm dissolving into the horizon, leaving only a faint echo of thunder in its wake. Elara stood alone on the spire, her heart pounding in the stillness. The cloak of feathers rested lightly on her shoulders, its magic now calm, peaceful. The treasure, the true treasure, was not the feather itself, but the wisdom she had gained in releasing it. The power of flight was not worth the cost of losing herself to the storm's endless hunger. The sky, vast and clear, stretched out before her, endless and open. And in that moment, Elara realized she no longer needed the treasure to feel free. She spread her arms wide, feeling the cloak respond, and with a deep breath, she leapt from the spire. The wind caught her, lifting her into the air, and Elara soared through the sky, no longer bound by the treasure's promise. Elara flew through the sky, the vastness of the horizon stretching endlessly before her. The storm had vanished, dissolving into nothing more than a faint whisper on the wind, and the world below lay in a serene, dreamlike stillness. The weight of the golden feather was gone, but in its place lingered a deeper understanding, one that filled her with a strange, quiet peace. She had passed the test, but the journey was not yet over. The cloak of feathers wrapped gently around her as she soared higher, carrying her far beyond the spire, far beyond the storm-touched lands she had once known. The wind was different now, no longer wild and chaotic, but steady and calm, like an old friend guiding her to a final destination. Beneath her, the seas rolled gently, the waves reflecting the pale light of a distant moon, and ahead she saw a distant land rising from the mists. This place felt familiar, though she had never seen it before. The land was lush, with rolling hills and tall ancient trees that swayed softly in the breeze. In the center of the landscape stood a solitary mountain, its peak crowned with a strange, ethereal light that flickered like a beacon. The cloak, as if sensing her thoughts, urged her toward the mountain. She descended slowly, the wind carrying her toward a narrow path that wound up the mountainside, disappearing into the glowing mist that clung to the summit. As her feet touched the ground, she felt a faint tremor beneath the earth, as if the land itself was aware of her presence, watching, waiting. Elara began to climb. The path was steep but smooth, the rocks beneath her feet cool and solid. The air was thick with the scent of wildflowers and earth, and the wind, though gentle, carried with it the softest of whispers, fragments of the voices she had heard during her journey. They were no longer cryptic or urgent, but soft, like old memories resurfacing from the depths of her mind. As she ascended, the light at the mountain's peak grew brighter, casting long shadows across the path. The glow was not blinding, but warm and inviting, like the glow of a hearth fire on a winter's night. It pulled her forward, filling her with a sense of purpose and finality, as though she was nearing the end of a long-forgotten story. At last Elara reached the summit. The view from the top was breathtaking. The land stretched out in every direction, vast and untouched, bathed in the soft glow of the mysterious light. And at the very peak of the mountain, surrounded by the mist and light, stood a single tree. Its bark was silver, its branches twisting elegantly toward the sky. And nestled among its roots was a pool of clear, still water, reflecting the stars above. Elara approached the tree, her heart beating steadily in her chest. The wind had grown quiet, the whispers fading into a profound, serene silence. She knelt before the pool, staring into its depths, and as she did, something stirred within the water. A ripple, soft and slow, spreading outward like the rings of a bell. The water shimmered, and in its reflection, Elara saw herself. Not as she was now, but as she had been throughout her journey. She saw the girl who had left her village, seeking adventure, yearning for something more than the life she had known. She saw the islands, the forests, the storm, all the trials that had tested her, changed her. And then she saw the treasure, not the golden feather she had released, but something far greater. It was the knowledge she had gained, the wisdom that had grown within her like a seed. The journey had been about more than just seeking a tangible reward. It had been about discovering her own strength, her own truth. Elara looked up at the silver tree, its branches swaying gently in the wind. This was the final choice, the moment the entire journey had led to. She could stay here, at the summit, where the air was pure and the world below seemed distant and small. She could linger in the peace of this place, far from the storms and shadows she had faced. Or she could return. The village she had left behind now felt like a distant memory, but it was still there, waiting for her, unchanged by the passage of time. The people she had known, the life she had lived, it was still hers, if she chose to reclaim it. And this time, she would return not as the restless girl who had sought escape, but as someone who had found her own path, her own freedom. The wind stirred again, softly now, wrapping around her like a gentle embrace. The cloak rustled, its feathers brushing against her skin as if to remind her that it too had been part of the journey. It had carried her through storms and silence, through darkness and light, and now it waited for her final decision. Elara stood, her heart light with the knowledge of her choice. She had found the treasure she had sought, not in the golden feather, but in herself. The journey had shown her the truth, and now she was ready to return.